We go to our next guest. He is a friend of ours here on Talk. He is one of, I think, the finest writers in the business. He is Mr. Michael Simmons, the economic editor at The Spectator. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Very well. Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, look, delighted to have you on, Michael. I always enjoy reading what you have to say. We're going to be discussing the budget because all the noise about asylum might be some good news finally for this Labour government, but that's all about to be shot out the water when Rachel Reeves stands up, I suspect, next Wednesday. Kemi Badenoch standing up and talking about the self-tax bombshell with the freezing of thresholds being extended. Nigel Farage saying, here's some cuts you can make rather than actually raising taxes on the British people. I mean, Michael, just how dire do you think things might be? We know she's now ruled out income tax rises, having basically rolled the pitch for them. That caused some turbulence in the market. We're now expecting, I think, I've seen the word smorgasbord, which just seems really weird that government's comfortable for that to be briefed around, of different ideas. I mean, how painful do you think this could be?
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty terrible. I mean, look, none of us wanted the basic rate to go up. I think I would align myself with both the Conservatives and Reform view that cuts are better than tax rises. I mean, that's the reason we're in this fiscal crisis is because we spend far too much. But if you're politically restrained in the way that Rachel Reeves was, then I think actually it would have made more sense to take the broadest tax we have, which other than VAT would be that basic rate on income tax, and put that up. But she's obviously not going to do that. So we're getting the smorgasbord, as you say, which I don't know if that's some coded reference to Torsten Bell's heritage, the man who's really writing this budget. And I think actually that's going to make things worse, because when you go for taxes on niche parts of the economy, what tends to happen is, one, they're inflationary, so the cost of living gets worse. And it means that the areas that are targeted, whether it's banks, whether it's gambling, whether it's pension funds, actually feel it a lot more than sort of broader tax rises would happen. So I think what you're going to see is a lot more examples of groups like the farmers, who were really hard done by before, and then is there more political pressure for the Chancellor to undo those moves? And secondly, and more importantly, is you'll find that they dampen growth, and before you know it, her new headroom, which she'll leave herself with next week, gets wiped out again, and maybe next spring we have weeks and weeks of yet more tax rise speculation. So it's not going to be positive next week.
I think, Michael, you hit the nail on the head here, which I think most people have overlooked in the moment, because they've even distracted by the fact that the OBRs, some have said 30 billion, some saying now 20 billion. Amazing that 10 billion seems to be found out of thin air by the OBR within a week, but hey-ho. For me, like you say, the political restraint, I think, is the most concerning thing. And I'm assuming, Michael, you're seeing the markets are reacting to that, because Sir Keir Starmer's right in some ways, isn't he? That if he were deposed as leader of the Labour Party, and if Rachel Reeves were therefore deposed as Chancellor, any leadership contest is only going to have to lead to contenders pitching to the soft left, which will mean increasing spending, but refusing to cut public spending at the same time as well, which means inevitably more tax rises.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why we saw the markets react so negatively when the Chancellor got upset at the dispatch box in the summer, because they're worried about what would come after her. The gilt markets, they worry about two things. They worry about the path of inflation, and they worry about how much borrowing, so how much demand there is, I guess, for their services. And they completely freaked out at the U-turn on the winter fuel payment, and more importantly, the U-turn on the disability benefits cuts, because they think that it doesn't matter that this is the biggest majority that our Prime Minister has had for years and years. They're just not able to get any of it through, because the Labour sort of rump backbench has made clear that they're not going to support any sort of cuts or anything that they see as right of centre. And markets are terrified of that. And I should say, this is not just a criticism of Labour. Kemi is obviously pitching the Tories as being fiscally responsible, but she's very clear that she won't touch the triple lock.
Yeah.
And markets would say to her as well, you know, if you're serious, there has to be some reform on that. So markets think whoever occupies number 11, none of them is going to bring in the kind of serious spending restraint that we need to get our national debt down to anywhere near sort of manageable levels.
It is concerning, isn't it, that we have a Labour Party that simply wanted to make a £5 billion cut, which is minuscule compared to, you know, what currently we spend on welfare. I mean, the CSJ think tank has said that if this isn't cracked down on disability benefits, you'll see it rise by another £27 billion by the come 2030, £700 more per resident. Then you've got a Conservative Party. As you say, I'm frustrated by, the truth is that the triple lock should not, people need to be honest with pensioners. And actually, the triple lock's protected. We're going to put people who rely on just their state pension into income tax, which actually might even happen during the period of this Labour government. And I would have expected the Tory government, or Tory party, sorry, that is parading themselves as supporters of President Milei in Argentina, who was very honest about the cuts he was going to make to state spending, to pensions, etc., to grow the Argentinian economy, to also be willing to make the brave decision, especially when it's basically do or die for the Conservative Party. I think Reform UK have been quite cute. They're not saying they're for the triple lock, but not saying they're against it either, leaving that question very much open. But come election time, I think many would say in the economics world, there's a fear that they would cave to what would feel like political pressure. Hopefully that won't happen. But with the budget next week, is there anything in particular you think that listeners should listen out for from what Rachel Reeves says? Is there anything in particular that could impact people that might not be so easily to spot, but actually could have quite a detrimental impact?
Yeah, I think people really need to look at what we call the fiscal drag or the stealth taxes. So that is, does she continue the freeze on the threshold for which people are brought into tax or go into the higher tax brackets, or worse, does she move them? It's clearly been a strategy of the Treasury, and something the Treasury has wanted to do for a number of years is just inflate away the tax-free allowance, just never move it up so that most people have an income that they are brought into tax. And actually, the reason why Rachel Reeves is going for that strategy as opposed to the rates is because they've got quite detailed internal polling on this that shows that people don't notice it, because she will be able to stand there and say, I've not risen taxes because the rate presumably will stay flat. And it won't be until next April or whenever the tax rises actually, or wherever the threshold changes come into effect, that people will be able to look at their pay slips and say, oh no, actually my tax contribution has gone up by hundreds of pounds. So I want everyone next week, when we hear whether the thresholds are frozen or whether they're moved, to go onto one of the calculators, the Spectator will do one, and look at how that will affect you, because that is her strategy, is tax by stealth. And if people, you know, have a look, see how these thresholds will affect them, then maybe that strategy won't work.
We're even hearing now that she might tax milkshakes. I mean, we're getting to the point in this country where I see the memes where people joked about the idea that, oh, one day Labour will tax the air that you breathe. But it's starting to feel like some of these memes are starting to become reality. I mean, how have we got to the point in this country where a milkshake, something that people may occasionally enjoy, is now also up for grabs because of the sugar tax that they want to impose on it? And I think there's also some other taxes potentially around holiday destinations or people. Like
yeah, they're talking about
well.
this tourist taxes that will, you know, harm the staycation. And this is the problem, because you know, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have decided that, well, clearly they don't have the political capital or desire to do cuts. They've also clearly decided they're not prepared to breach that manifesto pledge, so they're not going to do broad-based tax rises. Then you are left with just having to do these little niche things around the edges, and it opens you up to headlines that will stick, like we saw before with the pasty tax. We're now going to see it with the milkshake tax. But I think we really are, when you look at the overall tax burden, it's at a peacetime high. When you look at these niche bits of the economy that you can tax, we are at the limit. We saw this with employment taxes last year. We've now lost over 100,000 payroll jobs. There really is not much more that she can squeeze before the economy really starts to seize up.
Do you think there's a chance we could potentially see a recession? We obviously had the economic growth forecast come out where it showed in the third quarter 0.1% in economic growth. In fact, September, I think the economy contracted, if I remember correctly, the statistics. Is there a fear here of a recession, or is that unlikely, but it will just continue to see very stagnant growth?
Yeah, I think we're not quite in recession territory yet. I think this budget is not going to be good for growth, especially with other things coming down the line like the employment rights bill. But I think the economy is sort of just strong enough that it's going to keep treading water, maybe growing a little bit, but in per capita terms, and what makes people actually feel wealthier, that's going to stay flat and be very stagnant. And to be honest, in my mind, that's almost as bad as being in recession.
No, indeed. And then final question from me, sorry, Michael, on this is, do you think that there is votes in being honest with the British public? There'll be many politicians who say that we need to be honest about the fiscal situation, but when push comes to shove, voters just simply don't want to hear it. Or do you think politicians, in my mind, treat the public for fools, and actually the public are willing to have grown-up conversations as long as you present the facts fairly and honestly and show what the trade-offs are?
I've actually got slight sympathy for politicians here. I mean, as much as I would like Kemi, as we were talking about, to do something on the triple log, I can understand why she doesn't want to, because it would be politically, very difficult. And then on the left, you've got over half the country wanting things like wealth taxes, even when they're told that they would actually bring in less revenue. So I actually think the public needs to have a conversation about what size of state we want, and are we as a public prepared to pay for it? Because if we want to keep spending at the levels that we've become accustomed to, then taxes actually just will have to go up more than is even being proposed. And I actually think that's an issue for the wider public, and maybe after the budget, voters will start to think about that.
Michael Simmons, economic editor at The Spectator, thank you so much for joining us today. Well, ladies